Welcome back for another episode of the Shoegazing Podcast. I'm Jesper Ingevaldsson of shoegazing.com, one of the largest blogs in the world on quality footwear. In this episode, aim is to connect historic shoemaking with the present, and we do this together with William Efe Laborde. He's an independent bespoke shoemaker based in London who has a huge interest in old shoes, tools and leathers, which he both brings into his own shoemaking, and as a side business he also refurbish and sell old vintage tools. Given that classic shoes in general use old traditional construction methods, of course a lot is similar in how shoes are made now compared to, say, 100 years ago or so. But also a lot has changed. We talk about what was better back then than now, and also the other way around. Learn which area of shoemaking that William Efe Laborde thinks is at an all-time high now in present time, why the best tools were made before the World War II, and much more. So enjoy your listen. All right, William Efe Laborde, welcome to the Shoegazing Podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for having me here in your lovely workshop in London. Very cool place.
Yeah,
lots of vintage stuff as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we're
highly suitable.
Looking out on the. Well, I recently found out this is the last standing bomb site in London.
So that's
this building here. Yeah,
building that's sort of wrecked and very old.
Yeah. So it's the very last standing bomb site. And I had a visitor commented here saying it was like having my own Piranesi out of the window, which was quite a nice idea. Yeah. Piranesi was an Italian engraver who made these capriccios, so sort of wrecked building scenes and so forth. So I thought, that's a nice way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
So
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to talk a bit about sort of connect history to today and how one did things back in the days and how one do it today. But as always, first talk a bit more about you and your journey, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you end up in shoemaking?
Well, when I moved to London 14 years ago, I think it was now. I first worked in Mayfair in the art trade, and that was my introduction into sort of classic menswear and footwear and so forth. And so
you grew up in France, right?
I grew up in France, yeah, and then I moved to England for university first, and then I stayed on. And so quickly, suits and shoes were a question that I had to look into for work. And walking around all day, I ended up looking for very comfortable shoes because I have wide-fitting feet. Mm. And the natural progression of that was ending up, staring through the windows of Lob, enviously wanting a pair of shoes. And I've also always had this sort of do-it-yourself take on things in life. Yeah. And so I ended up thinking, well, I really need to learn how I could make these myself. And so one thing led to another, and I started off with evening courses. And then very quickly, I was really just knocking around the West End and trying to visit people and getting as much information as I could on shoemaking through people who seemed to be the most knowledgeable about it. And
so it started with, because it was what, Karadaka, right?
That's right, courses? Yeah. First I did an evening course with Karadaka for 9 months, which I would go after work in the evenings. And as soon as that was finished, I was just really eager to move on from understanding the basics to really having the capacity for more subtle and stylistic things like the shape of the shoe, lines, curves, and so forth. And I wanted to get beyond the basic technical skills into the more creative aspects of shoemaking. So I was looking for ways that I could quickly solve those issues. Like I quickly ran into the difficulty of adjusting the last. I thought, okay, I've got to understand last making, pattern making. So I sought out, we can get into closer detail. One of the first people I sought out was Jason Amesbury.
Yeah, who passed away.
He passed away recently. Yeah, we had his funeral yesterday. And the reason I sought out Jason was because I was reading about different shoemakers, and there were a lot of shoemakers in Japan whose work I was really impressed by. And it quickly appeared that they were all linked by the same person, which was Jason. They'd all learned through Jason. You have Marquez, Shoji Kawaguchi, and Bespoke Shoemaker. You've got Takayuki Hashimoto, and a number of other guys who I've met over time, and they had all spent time with him. And I thought, well, this is the guy I need to meet. He was just, from the very first meeting, I just knew that I'd met someone, a special character, and I walked back home, and I stopped at the station, and I actually called a friend, a very good friend, to say, I've met someone who, like somebody out of a book, He just made such an impression on me. So I met Jason, and then, he spoke about other outworkers, and from there, really, I kind of, he invited me to Shoemaker's Drinks, and then I met Jim McCormack, and then eventually I met Dominic Casey. And so I went and spent time with these guys. And that's really when I formed the core of the way I do things, my technique, the way I conceive the shoe, and the way, the way I see shoemaking really through their eyes.
And when did you sort of start up the brand, William Efe Laborde Shoemaker?
I started it it was really before COVID. I started thinking about making my own brand. I mean, as I say, when I began shoemaking, my goal was first to become sufficiently proficient that I could be bring myself up to a commercial level, that I could be satisfied that I could make a pair of shoes for someone, and it would, stand in high quality. So that took a while. And my path was, a little bit unconventional. I don't want to say I'm a autodidact, but, I went seeking information to people, but then I'd be coming back to the workshop and running over everything I'd heard and then doing it myself rather than having someone over my shoulder.
Yeah, you weren't like apprenticing.
No, so it wasn't the classic training, which meant it was a lot harder because I was making a lot of mistakes at first, but it meant that I know the reason behind everything because I've made the mistakes to understand why things are. So I don't make a shoe just by because that's the way it's always been done, although there is an aspect of that, but there's also the reasoning behind it, which has been brought to me by people like Jason, Jim, Dominic, and so forth. And so once I felt comfortable that I'd reach a good level, then I started thinking about doing outwork, setting up my own brand, and moving on from there, really. Yeah.
So how would you describe the Efe Laborde shoes?
Well, I think the word is classic, really. I'm not looking at a particular period, but classic footwear is classic because it was conceived at some stage and it has endured for its capacity to go through time. How can I put this? You can conceive something, but if it doesn't have longevity in the way it's built and so forth, if it doesn't last long, it can't become classic. So classic shoes have the inherent virtue of being able to go through time and withstand the passage of time. So that's how I look at shoes. They should be comfortable so that people wear them and want to keep wearing them a long time, and, you know, fit into people's lifestyles. And so, yeah, it's just classic design, nothing too showy or designed. It just has to fit into the customer's daily life, really.
But you also not only like the formal classics, I'd say. It's also, you know, embossed leathers or green character and chunkier stuff and all that.
Yeah. What interests me is really the width and breadth of shoemaking. I'm a person who really enjoys diversity, so I find just as much pleasure in making something really sturdy, like a proper country boot made with all the trappings, you know, if it has like a welted seam or a German seat, or it's got to be made for the purpose, you know. So if I'm making a boot, for example, it's going to have a thicker welt, it's going to have a thicker sole. It's not going to be made in the way, you know, you would make a city shoe. And again, if I make a city shoe, then it's going to have the classic beveled waist and 1/4-inch sole, or I can make light footwear. And so that's my interest, is really being able to have a grasp on these different things, make them in a classical way. And that's how you achieve a classic shoe. It's fit for purpose, provides comfort, and obviously looks nice on the occasion.
And do you make all yourself or also use outworkers?
No, I make everything myself. I do the measurements, I do the last, I do the pattern. The only thing I reserve for somebody else is the closing.
Yeah.
I have a closer that I work with closely. And then once the uppers come back to me, I do the bottom making and then send the shoes off for trees, of course. But I think, yeah, that's part and parcel of my character, is that I often see things that need to be done in a particular way, and I often end up thinking I'll only be best served by myself, you know. So that develops into making stains, making the thread myself, the type of beeswax I might use. So everything is really quite carefully considered, even if it's not on show for the customer, but everything down to, you know, the filler, what goes into the shoe, the quality of the felt I'm using, the quality of the cork, everything. If it's not made by myself, I ensure that it's the best quality. And then if I have the ability and if I've had the time and research, then I probably end up making it myself as well.
Cool. And who would you say are your customers of the Efe Laborde brand?
Well, they're usually people who are after something particular. I mean, they've probably already had a few pairs of shoes, if not, you know, 10 or 15, or they've had a certain amount of experience. They know what they're after. They might even want a particular shape to the last. I mean, not just the toe, but I've had some funny requests. So yeah, it's an informed customer. You know, at this stage, I think it's fair to say I'm still not a household name. It's not like some of the bigger makers, but I quite enjoy that. You know, I'm not really seeking to make numbers. I'm looking to make special footwear for people who appreciate and understand shoes, and it's nice to work with those people because you really develop something that's carefully thought out, and obviously the reward is if you're able to deliver what they were after, it becomes even more satisfying than if you've got someone who's a bit less discriminate about what they're after. So those are the kind of people I cater to. Yeah.
And do you also do freelance work? Or
yeah, I also do some artwork for the West End, and over time, I'm quite pleased to have developed a bit of a reputation. So I get sent slightly more fiddly jobs, which is quite nice. I think that's a testament to the work I do. So,
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, you have a very big interest in the older days, so to speak, both how shoemaking was done, say the decades around the 1900s, and the designs and the tools and the materials used and all that. Why do this attract so much?
I guess, well, I gained quite a deep understanding for history through art. I'm a very visual person, and my experience through the art world gave me quite a better understanding than I previously had, and a love for history, and an understanding that you can connect with people through time. And so I love researching topics and being able to understand how people did things, what motivated them. And so material objects, material, leather, tools, techniques are all kind of an insight into the way people thought about things. And if you can grasp that thinking, I think it really enhances the way you make a shoe. Because, I mean, it's about understanding people, really. You've got to understand the customer. So developing capacity to understand other people is important. And yeah, doing that through history is, I just find it fascinating. So looking through written references, or just even observation. I mean, you look at the way tools used to be made. Through research, I've come to understand that shoemakers and toolmakers would probably live in the same building. One of my favorite toolmaker, Jupp, I found him through London Registries.
Yeah, because that's a British company.
Yeah, he was based in Soho. I mean, he wasn't a company; it was just it was a grandfather, father, and son operation.
Right. Yeah.
And they operated on Wardour Street in Soho, and the building they were in also had a bootmaker, and there was a closer in the same building as the guy forging tools. So that closeness is really reflected in the quality of the tools, because they would have obviously been having daily conversations, and the way things are made are just so much more carefully considered and looked at, and the result is incomparable to the kind of stuff that you can get nowadays.
Yeah, because tell me a bit about the business with old tools. You had that like a side thing as
well, I mean, I think it's no secret that all shoemakers kind of struggle at the beginning. It's one of the main hurdles is finding a good toolkit. And so, I had to jump through that hoop like anybody else. And so initially, I started buying stuff on internet, and I couldn't always really justify the expense. Sometimes you're looking for one thing in particular, and you end up having to buy a huge job lot of 3 kilos for 1 or 2 items. And you got to think, well, okay, I don't want to accumulate all this stuff. I've got to get rid of it. And I just thought the best way I can do this and help out other shoemakers is to restore it so it's ready to use again.
Yeah, exactly.
And that'll make it attractive for other people, because otherwise it's just a rusty pile of junk until you've worked. And so I started selling things on eBay, and really unwittingly I got a bit of reputation. I was going at shoemaker drinks, and I was the tool guy. That's how I was being introduced. And so came a stage where I thought, well, I could probably do this with my own website. I don't need to give eBay a 15 or 20% cut of what I'm earning. So I started a website, and the ball just kept rolling. But it was never really my intention to be the tool guy. But it served a great purpose. It's paid for leather, it's paid for, costs with the workshop and so forth. And now it's I'm far more selective about things because I'm dedicating my time to shoemaking. So I have to prioritize, but I can't help, when I find something on eBay, I'm like, oh, that would look nice, cleaned up. And I end up buying things, and then I probably already know someone who's been looking for it for ages, or it's just the pleasure of restoring something and then putting it back into circulation and knowing that it's going to be loved and valued and make great shoes for another 100 years, hopefully,
And you mentioned one reason, but what other reasons would you say that there are why older tools are often of good quality?
Well, I mean, I pulled this out as a nice example, and they're really a product of the period. So, I mean, I think unquestionably the best tools were made in the late 1800s, in the Victorian period, and at that time, London was a huge, I mean, it still is a hub of trade, but at the time, things were coming from different parts of the empire. So the handle would be made with exotic wood, which gives them quite a lot of weight.
What the tool is?
Yeah, so this is a seat wheel made by Jupp, one of my favorite makers.
The one you mentioned.
From the West End. And so the handle is probably made out of lead wood, which is an African wood, which I think nowadays is protected. And the steel, so he would have had, I mean, it's hard to imagine nowadays because Soho is mostly, clubs and pubs. But back then it was really what we would call now a craft centre. You had people forging tools, you had printmakers, anything, trades that we don't even hear about nowadays. And it was all crammed into this really small area. And so that created a discussion between the people making things. And so, if you were a bootmaker, you could leave your workshop and go knocking on Jupp's door and say, okay, well, I need this or that. And so the tools are just extremely well conceived. The steel as well is of a different quality than modern steel.
Okay, in what way?
Well, I didn't really understand this for a long time. But with the, and it sounds far-fetched, but I've had it confirmed, with the nuclear explosions during the Second World War, nuclear radiation propagated throughout the globe, and the steel manufacture changed from what was before the Bessemer process to another process, whose name I forget, but essentially prior to the Second World War, you would blow air into pig iron to produce steel. Okay. And then after that, it was pure oxygen.
Because of the radiation?
Well, I mean, so nowadays, most people making steel don't need high-grade steel, but there are companies whose specialty it is to go and dig up wreckage from the bottom of the sea to recuperate pre-World War steel for high-grade engineering because it doesn't have a nuclear radiation in the steel. So, I mean, obviously it's irrelevant to shoemaking, but it just means that the process has changed and the steel quality is different and you cannot reproduce that anymore.
Very interesting, because most of the old stuff you can still do if you have the time or whatever.
The shape and everything, but the steel, essentially, you cannot reproduce it. I'm sure there will be engineers who are kind of pulling their hair out because I might have given a few inaccuracies, but essentially you've got the gist of it. And when I'm working with these tools, the main quality is that the steel retains heat. When you're ironing the shoe, it just retains heat and gives you time to iron, so you're not too hot, not too cold. And, you get a nice, which allows you to get a nice crisp finish, which everyone seeking to achieve.
But are there any tools that are better nowadays, would you say?
You can get very good quality rasps, hand-stitched rasps in France and in Japan. There are certain guys now who are starting to make things again. You got Phil Norsworthy, we were talking about earlier, making awls. There's a chap in Japan called, his Instagram handle is Ito Tokowari, who makes irons and welt beaters and things like that, which are very nice. There's another chap making awl handles called Okada Tools.
Yeah, right.
There's a shoemaker in Hungary. No, I'm saying in Ukraine, I'm sorry. Starco Tools. I haven't tried them, but the fact that they're made by a shoemaker is a good sign because he obviously understands. And there are still, old firms. There's George Barnsley, which has been around forever. But, and I say this in the best intent, I think a bit of positive criticism would be healthy for them. I think that shoemakers need to be more demanding of the tool makers in order to preserve that heritage, because otherwise it will fade away. I hope that George Barnsley renews their conversation more closely with the trade in order to improve the level of their production, because really they are the last specialist shoe tool maker making certain things which are very specialized.
I know there's from some tanneries that after working closer with shoemakers, they actually develop things in that direction that you guys like. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I know that they're working with I think they're bag makers. They do all types of leather work, basically hand stitching. But the core of their reputation was for shoe tool making, and hopefully the quality returns to what it was before.
But in 50 years' time or so, will you use old tools made in the 20th century early, or old tools then maybe now?
It's really hard to say. I think at the moment social media has obviously enabled lots of people to have conversations, and if you have someone who's passionate enough to be motivated to go into it, then it could be possible. But for the time being, I can't see anything better than these, and they've served. I'm probably at least the fourth shoemaker they've served, and I still use these on a weekly basis, and they're just so sturdy and such a pleasure to work with. So I know that I'm only just looking after them for the next guy, really.
Yeah.
But I really hope that somebody out there will discover this specialty, because it's really broad and deep. Shoemaking tools are one of the broadest tool making fields I've seen. We really have so many different kinds of tools.
Exactly. There's so many specialized
things.
Very one small step you can have a separate tool for.
There are different you can have the same tool with the same purpose, and it can be made in 3 or 4 different patterns according to country, or even certain companies made it in different ways. So I hope that somebody out there is listening and takes an interest, and if they want to give me a call, I'm happy to talk about them and give them directions on how to get there.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So when it comes to making shoes by hand, the techniques, etc., what was different, say, 100 years ago or so, to how it's done today?
Well, nothing has really changed. If you want it, you can make shoes the way they were made, exactly the way they were 100 years ago. And the virtue of that is obviously the fact that there were far more shoemakers back then, and so they would have been competing with each other. And so the truth of it is, you don't really need to innovate anything. If you're looking for answers in shoemaking, more often than not, the answer is in the past, not really in the future. So, that's my point of reference. That's the way I see it. And that's why I spend most of my time delving back into the past. And if you know where and how to look, you will find the answer. And so that informs the way I make shoes. Yeah, I mean, certainly the way I make my shoes is not different to a shoe made 100 years ago. I use the same quality of felt, if not a bit better, perhaps. The leather I try and buy as much old stock as I can, because again, production has changed. You get really good leather nowadays, but it's not the same leather that was produced. In fact, having the choice of both is great, is nice, in terms of the quality of the grain, in terms of the substance, in terms of the way it finishes. You can, if you have modern stock and old stock, it just allows you to answer client demands better if they want something really sturdy or if they want something light. And again, if you look back in the past, people were answering a much broader type of demand for footwear. They were making boots, they were making indoor shoes. And so with each of those commissions, there's an answer. Nowadays, I think it's true to say that a lot of people are ordering city shoes, to wear around. I've never come across someone whose first bespoke order is going to be, like a double sole derby to go and, run around in a field or,
no, exactly.
or watch
when
a
you
horse
spend
race.
that money for the first time, you
exactly.
sort of, you don't want it for beaters.
Exactly, yeah. But I hope that will change, because I think we're moving on now. I mean, I think shoemaking had a big upsurge with social media. I think call it a dozen years, 10 years ago or so, or 15 years ago. And so that customer base is quite well informed now.
Yeah.
And they will have probably by now started their journey, and they've bought one or two pairs of shoes, and maybe they start thinking, where can I go next?
Yeah, because like you said, me personally, now I have quite a few bespoke shoes, and now you don't feel the same way. Now you choose rain shoes and that type of thing.
Exactly, yeah.
Also in need of, but it wasn't the first choice, but now you're at that stage.
So you can see that in the conversation people are having about leather, and they want waterproof leather, or they want something to wear in summer, so they would need something that expands and contracts and is softer to the foot, more gentle when the foot expands. So those are the things I really, really, it attracts me because it has diversity. So I like to work with goat leather, as you were mentioning, boast leather, all types of different box calf in different thicknesses according to the purpose of the shoe, pigskin, and if you refer back to things in time, then you can get ideas, you can get inspiration. So that's why I'm just constantly looking back. Yeah. It's all there for you to find. And in fact, it's that's really where the main struggle lies in shoemaking, because it's an oral craft. And so it gets passed through word of mouth, but inevitably things get lost. And
what would you say have gotten lost through the years that you think should be used more nowadays in terms of techniques? And
the general technique is obviously still there for welted shoes, but little things like a few years ago, Dominic Casey and I were having a conversation about Wellingtons, and we were looking at the welted seam, for example. So I spent a lot of time in the library trying to find books and references on things, and understanding that for the welted seam, you actually need a very specific type of leather, so it can be ironed down. And then you figure out that actually you can only hand stitch it in to obtain the correct result. You've got things like a German seat if you're making a boot, so that the guy can pull off the boot without ripping off the heel. So you can.
What is a German seat?
So a German seat is essentially the simplest way of explaining it is you welt the seat of the shoe, and then you stitch it into the sole, and then you make it disappear. So you hammer up the welt against the heel. So the end result is
360-degree
exactly
stitch, but hidden in the
exactly. If you've produced it properly, it's actually invisible. But it just means that you can use a boot jack and you won't rip off the heel. Which, if you've just got a heel which is simply nailed in, you'll have a hard time, but eventually it may come off. So those type of things, you've got little detailings as well, like a skived and folded edge, and techniques which either enhance the aesthetic or the functionality of the shoe get lost. And also something which has got lost that I'm really interested in is turn shoes for really light footwear.
Okay.
They've become a little bit obsolete because they're so hard to repair. But if you have someone who enjoys dancing or who wears slippers indoors, or it's a fantastic construction, or for ladies' footwear as well. And it was the main technique for many centuries.
Yeah, that was how you did shoes.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, most of the time, West End, it's fair to say, pushed every technique to its summit. And turn shoes, I have a pair I can show you later, made in the West End, were just incredibly light and beautifully made with a very, very thin sole.
A turn shoe.
So those are the kind of things that it's important to not let die out, and to be able to offer to people who eventually I think will be interested to return to those things once they've kind of covered the basics and they're wanting to delve into things a bit more.
But are there any areas where you think things have improved today from how it was made back then?
I think finishing is probably the most obvious thing. Shoemaking is really broadcast through social media. I think that's probably anyone's first point of contact now into discovering the craft, rather than being introduced to it from their family or through word of mouth or their social environment. And so it obviously has to present beautifully. So I think especially Japanese makers have pushed that forward quite a lot. So finishing is definitely the thing which has been pushed forward compared to what was produced in the last 30, 50 or more years. But that being said, you can have a beautifully finished shoe, but it needs to be a representation of the quality of the making inside. I think the way the quality of a shoe is really a case-by-case thing. You have people who are making absolutely beautiful work, and you have other people who are rushing things a little bit more, but that's really case-by-case, and it's always been the truth through time. You have the star makers, and you have the guys who are more focused on numbers. So
that's the thing that when you look at historic shoes, the fact that there was so many excellent stuff was because there was much more shoemakers. There were probably much more crappy shoemakers.
Exactly.
As well then, so.
You're not going to keep the stuff which was made in a day.
Exactly.
In the cabinet, that's been lost to the passage of time. So.
Yeah, but you already touched a bit about it, but if we talk more about the materials and the leathers, so you say that for you it's great to have the options of both the vintage stuff and the new stuff. But how do these differ? If you explain what's the difference between the old leathers and the new ones, can you pinpoint it, so to speak?
Well, the way I see it, essentially, cattle stock has changed, much like the way we produce vegetable and fruit nowadays. And not many people know this, but through my time at university, I ended up looking into the way I traveled to Sweden, in fact, to look at the way agriculture works.
All right.
And nowadays, everything is organized by one major conglomerate called Monsanto, who basically have stronghold on seed production. And they control the way that crops more or less around the world are made. So the type of corn that we eat now is very different from the type of corn that would have been used 100 years ago. And it's the same for cattle. And so the breed and the type of hide that comes from that is different.
Things go quicker today.
Things go quicker, yeah.
They're more efficient.
And people were less scrupulous as well back in time. So unfortunately, the best quality leather doesn't always come from the most romantic setting, the cows were obviously fed on grass and so forth. I mean, it's impossible for me to say, but, nowadays some cattle is fed on, fish food and this kind of stuff. Not fish food, but food produced from the fish industry. So the animals are different and the result is different. And old stock leather, you have, many people know about Freudenberg, and the grain there is a lot tighter because the animals were much younger.
Yeah. Then you took them younger, so to speak.
Exactly.
Nowadays, it's not really okay to kill off animals at that age.
Exactly. And the method in which the leather was tanned was using much more harmful chemicals, which now it's all been phased out. So you couldn't produce that kind of leather anymore. And so now the leather is produced in a much more ethical and considerate way, and the result is different. And it has different different virtues and different qualities. And it also depends on the kind of tannery that you go to. I mean, we talk about a box calf, and it's always more or less tanned in the same way. And yet, you have God knows how many tanneries producing a totally different leather out of the same technique. So,
but like you said, in terms of the chemicals and all that used, it's not allowed, at least not in Europe and most part of the world, I'd say today. You can't use that. No.
And I mean, it's good for everyone, on a similar note, I took an interest when I was making my stains, and the book I was reading from the 30s recommends that you use formaldehyde, which is used to preserve, dead animals and stuff.
Exactly. When you go to the museum, you have this, maybe a heart or stuff like that.
Exactly.
Liquid.
That's right. Yeah. So you can put something in that liquid and it'll preserve for 100 years. So it's obviously not very not the healthiest thing to be handling. So. Had to move away and find other solutions. And I think it's a good thing that we have those options nowadays. So, I think that's it's quite nuanced, but there's good and bad in both.
Yeah. But when one talk about the decline of the leather quality, would you say it's correct?
Well, it's true that tanneries are having a harder time finding the hides that they want. I think you can speak to any tannery and they say there's a lot of competition to get the best hides. Now, is that because the animals are not there anymore, or is it because the demand in better quality leather has increased? I mean, we know, for example, that Hermes and the LVMH group are buying tanneries to keep them producing, but obviously it also implies that they get first choice. So perhaps the leather is there, but we don't get access to it. Other people do. I mean, I collect a lot of vintage leather, and it's true that the reason I do it is because it's beautiful and I love working with it, and it has a lot of qualities that I can't find in other tanneries today. But I wouldn't use it for everything I make, you can find superior products being made today. So I would be a bit more nuanced than, the leather industry is in decline.
And it's the way I learn about it is that, like you say, in a way, animal welfare is more ethic today.
Yes.
But in a way, it's also not, because you have these antibiotics and you they are bred quicker and all. So you have both things, so to speak. But if you look at like eco-certified farming or whatever you would call it and stuff like that, I think you should be able to find at least, maybe you still have the visual defects, which of course is one part of quality. Yeah. But otherwise, in terms of, the raw material quality should be able to get really good also today. Yeah.
It's another good thing to bear in mind. I like to work a lot with Annonay, and it's true that when you buy a skin of Annonay, the entire hide is not perfect, but that's part of the quality of it, is that it's been finished in a minimal way so that the beautiful parts of the hide are the one that you're going to choose for the footwear, and the rest you have to discard. But it's not hiding anything; it's all on display, and so you'll select maybe sections for one or two pairs.
Well, what would you say is your favorite leather of all time, if you had to choose something?
It's really tricky, isn't it?
I can understand.
I'm French English, so I'm quite attached to using materials from both countries. Hands down, personal taste, German and French leather for uppers is the best. I also like Italian leathers for certain things, but just through my sensibilities and stuff, I like to work with French and German tanneries.
Do you have any more specific thing that you sourced that really blew your mind, so to speak?
No, it's really down to every skin. I go through, if I can, I'll go and see a tannery, and it's not the product itself. Sometimes you'll find one skin where the shade, the tone, because, some tanneries, depending on the stock of the skin, whatever, they run it through their process, and it's always an identical process, but the skin, being a natural product, will react differently. And so, you'll find one hide and you think, wow, now I've got to have that.
So if you look at it, of the vintage stuff that you've come across, I've got some skins from the Peabody tannery, which is beautiful. I've got some old Milchrome, which was tanned in Northampton. I've got some French and Scottish skins. I've got Freudenberg from Germany. Everybody speaks about Freudenberg, and it's true that more often than not, it really, the way it handles and everything, it's just wonderful. But I really like Annonay. I love the sheen, of it, and their grained leathers as well. Each, Baker's also produces beautiful leather. Well, where do you get a hold of the vintage leathers that you use?
It's just a constant search. It's really what, you just keep it in mind all the time, and through word of mouth, you mention it to people and they say, oh, well, I might have something, or I've heard somebody's got something, and then you have to chase it up. And it's just a constant search. Yeah.
If we look at your shoes, are there any things from, main things from further back in history that you can find in your shoes that you aren't really common among other ones done today?
It's mostly in detailing. But one of the main things is the stain I use. So I mix the stains myself, so I can really match the shade of the leather instead of using pre-made leather. So I really have a better hold. So I can do something transparent. I can do something opaque. I can do a contrast stitch, or I can, let the stitch show a little bit through the welt. I really like different types of edge finishing for the top line of the shoe, or you can have a skived and folded edge. Yeah. So you end up with a shoe that has no raw edges. Everything is really beautifully clean. It just enhances the whole appearance of the shoe. And then other little detailings in terms of the finesse of the stitching. I'm quite meticulous about, if I'm making a light shoe or something quite dressy, then it should be very fine. If I'm making a sturdier shoe, I'll make sure to point out to the closer that it should be a stout, sturdy stitch. If I'm making a boot, for example, I'll make sure to have something like a welted seam, or the way I might make the pattern. So it's really more in the detailing that you find these little things that you may not find somewhere else. Yeah.
Are there any techniques or materials or such that you've read about in old books, or so that you haven't tried yet but would like to?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch. I mean, I have some books, and it's mainly like repair methods as well, because it was far more common for people to try and repair boots themselves as well at home. So you have a lot of books aimed at the sort of homemaker trying to resell. So you have diagrams of someone it's called blind stitching, and you literally shove your hand up the shoe and you you pass the thread through the hole from inside the shoe and outside. Right. But I mean, with the size of my hand, it's just totally impossible. So I have to find someone to do it for me. But there's a lot of things, that I've seen and that I haven't had time to try yet. Stitching like entire heels. There's a beautiful detail that I have so far not found anyone to run me through on a lady's shoe, on a covered heel, where the sole, so the top, what we call the top piece, which is the bottommost, the hardest part of the heel, which touches the ground, is sewn to the heel breast, so the vertical section of the heel.
So, because I've seen it, follow along all the way down, but not.
So I'll have a sample. I'll pull it out, and I can describe it to you. This is a lady's shoe that was made by Atloff and Norman, which was later bought up by Hook, Knowles and Smith, who was then bought up by Lobb.
Okay.
And so it's from the 1890s. It's made in London. Yeah, beautifully delicate. So it has this detail, skive and rolled edges, which I was mentioning, with a beautifully punched vamp and toe cap. So it's a sort of peaked Oxford design. And then it's got a wooden heel, which has been covered in kid. And then you have this stitch here, which is 20 to the inch. So it's extremely fine. And what's happening is that it's actually been channeled on the corner here, which is totally invisible now.
Yeah, now you're on the breast edge of the...
Exactly, heel, And the maker has gone through the sole, which is curving along the breast of the heel, sewing on the corner to attach the covering of the heel, and then taking a corner down and then stitch it. So, I mean, it's quite complex. And I've not found anyone so far who can run me through the technique.
Yeah, very cool. And then you attach the final top piece on top of that. Yeah, cool.
So... And
I mean, if you look at this quickly...
Yeah.
All right, I mean, it's
a terribly simple shoe, but when you look at it in detail, that is mind-blowing, because it's a white buckskin shoe. It's about 150 years old now, and it's got no stains. And another trick that's been used, because obviously they didn't have plastic covers in the day, they would have used a ultra-fine piece of leather or cloth to cover the shoe in the making process, and then cut it away. And you can just see it's got this sort of tannish colour between the sole and the upper there of what would have been covering the shoe in the making process.
I will make sure. I don't really work with, show notes for the podcast normally, but for these, I think I'll have to take some photos and show the podcast listeners what we're talking about. Do you have any other cool vintage shoes?
I do,
You can show cool techniques and materials from? Maybe not the best radio, but like I said, I will put it on the blog as well so people can see what we talk about later as well.
So this is another shoe. So this is a turn shoe.
Okay.
And talking of leather quality,
it looks sort of like
King Charles. Well, it's exactly what the king was wearing. Apart from so I know for a fact that the king was wearing a pump stitched shoe, and this is a turn shoe. It's the same result, but this has got an even thinner sole, and it's a sturdier construction, and it's made out of what was the original patent leather. It doesn't even look like leather now because it's just caked with this blacking that they would have applied to it.
Yeah, exactly. You basically stuff.
It's a sort of tarry. I'm not quite sure what the composition was, and so it's a single piece of leather. There's no the sole is the insole, and you flip it inside out. And I mean, just the shape of the whole thing is just beautiful. If you look at the heel,
is that?
It would probably be possible to say if you took it to lot because it has an inventory number on the bottom.
Yeah.
But just looking from the shape of the foot and the style, early 1900s or maybe late 1890s.
Yeah, very, very cool.
With a silk lining and top line as well.
I mean, obviously not very useful nowadays for everyday life.
No.
But I mean, for those who are after some really fine evening shoes.
Yeah, evening shoes or walking around. If you have a house with stone flooring, or you're a dancer.
Yeah, exactly.
Or somebody.
That was what you mentioned. What's the benefit of a turn shoe in terms of comfort, would you say? Yeah.
Well, so you make it from a different type of leather for the sole because you're turning it inside out. Yeah, so you can't use the butt; it's just too hard. So you're using a different section of the hide, but because you make way with the insole, it's just very, very light. It's the lightest shoe you can make.
All right, very interesting these things. We could probably talk forever, but I'm not sure if the podcast listeners would stay around for that. But William Efe Laborde, thank you very much for being part of the podcast.
Well, thank you, Jesper, and thanks to everyone for taking an interest. I hope it's you've learned a few new bits.
Yeah, sure. Cheers.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening in on this episode. If you enjoyed the podcast, please give it a good rating or comment in your podcast player. Shoegazing Podcast will be back with a new episode in a short while, so hear you again soon.